and we're going to bring on Jim McPherson. This is a packed program here, and I can't think of anyone better to have on here than Jim right now.
Jim, how you doing?
Great to see you again.
Glad to see you again.
Good to see you. Come and sit and join us. Thank you. Well, here's something from Ann Arbor. Let's just get this in real fast since both of you are here. You can both respond. I've read that reports of Grant's drinking were greatly exaggerated and that Lincoln never actually said, "Find out the kind of whiskey he drinks and I will send all my generals a barrel of it." This is from John in Ann Arbor. What are your thoughts? You both in either.
Well, Lincoln once said he wished he had said that, but he didn't actually say that.
All right.
And in fact, that's a saying that was first uttered by, I think, William Pitt in the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, about his generals in that war. So it's not, even if Lincoln had said it, it was not original with Lincoln.
All right.
And on the question of exaggeration, I think it's true that there were all kinds of rumors about Grant's drinking. There may have been some fire under that smoke, but it got greatly exaggerated over time.
And the rumors of where he's drinking, the Cadwallader one, which goes into great detail, is in a quiet time of the period. And Grant is probably, he and Julia have a wonderful relationship with the family. And I think Rollins undoubtedly understood it, and other Grant staffers do, because they make Julia is with him a tremendous amount of the time. In the Vicksburg campaign, Julia and the three older children will be with Grant up until the 28th day of April. But when they go back to St. Louis, he leaves Fred with him.
Yeah.
So Fred is with him through the rest of the Vicksburg campaign. In fact, on the Illinois Monument, they list Grant's staff, and they list Frederick Dent Grant, and they use the type of spelling you use for aid then, A-I-D, rather than A-I-D-E. And Mrs. Grant is with him during the siege, and she arrives somewhat after the alleged incident in the Cadwallader, and she is with him throughout the winter of 1864-65. She is at City Point with him, and I can see Julia and she did not get along well. I can see when the River Queen shows up on the 24th day of March, I can say Julia saying, "What, that woman is with him?" Because that's not a pleasant period then.
So it wasn't really drink that got him, but it was those cigars you were talking about. That did.
The cigars.
Now, I think I've probably asked this question of both of you in previous virtual book signings, but I'm going to do it again because I want the two of you together to talk a bit about this. And was the Civil War inevitable? Now, Lincoln, in August of 1855, he wrote to George Robertson, and a phrase that he used in there is, "There is no peaceful extinction of slavery." There is no way he felt that war could be averted if slavery was going to go away. So certainly he thought the war was inevitable. What do the two of you think about this? I sort of think it was the signing, the ratification of the Constitution.
Well, Lincoln said that in 1855, but he also said on many other occasions that he looked forward to the ultimate and peaceful extinction of slavery, even if it took 100 years. He said that in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. He said it on other occasions. So I don't think we can take one Lincoln quotation and say that proves what Lincoln thought. As far as the question of the war's inevitability, the way I've always thought about that is that some kind of a confrontation, a showdown, was inevitable once the election of 1860 shaped up as it did. And when Lincoln was elected, the southern states began seceding. some kind of a confrontation. As Lincoln himself said, the tug has to come now. And this is in a letter to Alexander Stephens on in December of 1860. Tug has to come sometime, and it might as well be now. But by tug, he didn't necessarily mean war. I think that, so some kind of confrontation, some kind of showdown over the issue of the expansion of slavery, and the political power of the slave states within the Union was inevitable. But it didn't have to take the form of the war that we know happened between
You don't think so? You
1861
don't
and
think that,
65.
you think it could have been done peacefully, the extinction over 100, and we may still have it, for heaven's sake.
Who
Because I
knows?
sort of think, I mean, I don't know. I didn't have Lincoln on the couch to examine. But I could see in his heart of hearts where he didn't feel that it could be eradicated without that. And he had to be politique, did he not? And he was in the political realm, and he had to be able to say, we think this can be done peacefully.
Well, I think he anticipated the way it would happen would be one state after another, starting with Delaware or Maryland or Kentucky or Missouri, that it would gradually erode around the edges, and it would be abolished by state action, just as it had been done by by the northern states in the years and decades after the American Revolution.
I want to hear what you have to say, but Orville, Vernon Burton is with us. Vernon, why don't you come in? If you want to just move over a little bit, if you don't mind. Okay, and there we go. Welcome.
Thank
It's
you.
nice to see you.
Always good to see
Thanks
you
for
and
being
be here
here.
in this wonderful bookstore.
You're here for the American Historical Association, right? And so we're very happy that they're in town so that we can put this lineup together. We're talking about the possible inevitability of the Civil War. What's your thought on that?
Well, Delaware would have undoubtedly done as Jim says, but I think they and some of the border states might have, but I think maybe it would not have. Once it starts, I think it's going to be the terrible war it is. Now, it could have been done more, because Lincoln believes initially there's a great reservoir of pro-Union loyalty in the South. Unfortunately, I don't think Lincoln was right. I think the radicals have the lead, and the radicals have seen. I don't think the radicals are going to back off in the South, because they have seen their position vis-a-vis the North deteriorate materially, economically, and population-wise, and then the attribute of warfare you're going to have with a final tug between 1850 and 1860. And I don't think the Southern leadership who really wants the hard line are going to.
And losing power as well,
Yeah.
besides economics, etc., and what they thought their way of life. Was there a point of no return? Sumter, or?
Fort Sumter was really the
Is
point of
that
no
it?
return.
Right.
That was the trigger that
Yeah.
set it off.
Because the South really doesn't have the viability of the 7 states to really make something work until they get the other 4 in there.
You also
So
feel,
granted,
Vernon,
I
that
could probably say 3, but I get the people in Arkansas angry with me.
that's good. You also feel that the war was inevitable from the ratification, as I say, of the Constitution when slavery was in there?
I did not get to hear what Jim said, even though I studied with him and used to lecture about the inevitability of the Civil War. Maybe I was at University of Illinois too long with the Blundering Generation and James G. Randall. When I went back to do the Age of Lincoln, I actually changed my mind. And I have heard Jim quoted as saying that he argues it's inevitable, but I've never really seen him write that. I think there's a point which people come, but no, I changed my mind completely. I had a student who once had seen me somewhere giving a lecture after the book came out, and he said, "Professor Burton, remember I wrote that the Civil War was not inevitable, and you had written back about a page showing me how it was." And I said, "Yes, but your essay convinced me that I was wrong over time." But as I did my own research, I am amazed that we got into Civil War, and I think except for Lincoln being president, almost anybody else we might not have. I disagree a little bit with this, and at the Lincoln Forum, you might remember a year ago, they had the panel, and I was sort of sorry about it. Everybody on that panel said it was inevitable, including Bill Freeling, who I actually doesn't think his own work shows it to be, unless you talk about a certain point where, in fact, there's firing on Fort Sumter.
Well, okay, Lincoln, I was going to ask about alternative history later on with the two of you, but here is Lincoln. He's elected. If he wasn't elected, would this, do you think, still have come in 1922 as an example? I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think it's about
What's
slavery, and I think by
happen?
1922, probably we wouldn't have had slavery.
How?
But again, it's a question of what is inevitability. I think that the South was so used to blustering and arguing and threatening that Lincoln and many others, including those in the South, thought that's exactly what they were doing. And Bill Cooper, in his Southern History presidential address, had sort of made an argument that Lincoln did not know the South, and that was the problem that sort of led to the Civil War. Something of what you were saying, Mr. Bearss, that he had overestimated Unions and didn't know the planters. I argue just the opposite, of course. I argue that Lincoln is a Southerner. There's a lot more South than just the plantation owners and others. But Lincoln, of course, defined the war not about slavery. What Lincoln had thought is that, white Southerners who didn't own slaves would not fight for slavery. Well, when Lincoln gave these folks a way out, when he said this war is not about slavery, it's about preserving the Union, we do not know, in fact, what non-slave owning white Southerners would have done if Lincoln had said this war is about slavery and ending slavery. But after my 34 years teaching at the University of Illinois, I can guarantee you that if Lincoln had said that, he wouldn't have got a corporal guard from the North to have come down to a fault. And so I think it's sort of an open question still. And I'm not as convinced that it seems the big shift that everyone sees it was inevitable. I just don't think that that history is inevitable, as you showed with so well, and led the profession back to look at there was not inevitable that the North was going to win the Civil War. I don't think it was inevitable that you had to get into. There were a lot of other options. There was a lot of other options besides war.
Well, Jim, how do you feel about this? How has slavery been gone by today?
I think that the changes in the economy in the late 19th century, changes in technology would have eventually made slavery economically not viable anymore, and that one state after another would have abolished it. And that is really what Lincoln anticipated, I think, in the 1850s. And many Americans thought that slavery existed in 1776 in every one of the 13 American states that fought the Revolution. But one by one, the states north of the Mason-Dixon line abolished it. And that was seen as a possible scenario, starting with Maryland and Delaware in the 1860s or 70s, and it would crumble around the edges. Slavery had been abolished in the British colonies in the 1830s. After the Civil War, it was abolished in Brazil and Cuba, and I think probably would have eventually been abolished there, even if the Confederacy had retained it, and that by some time in the early 20th century, I think it would have withered away.
The great irony is, though, of course, we're being speculative and prophets as opposed to historians, but probably we would not have had this 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment that changes way. And, I grew up in the segregated South, and it was bad. Segregation was terrible, what it did and things. And we talk about apartheid in the United States and apartheid in South. But we had that great tradition of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment that Jim has written about, and the positive liberty that comes into the that's a basis that makes, I think, democracy works in the United States, so that someone like a Martin Luther King Jr. can sort of take Lincoln's rule of law and argue against the unjust laws, suffer the consequence, and gets it changed, which is very much I see in the Lincoln tradition.
Well, if it's not inevitable, then.
I don't know. Maybe they did say it was inevitable. I missed that part.
Well,
So.
was the war worth it? All that suffering that we went through?
That's a philosophical
Yes,
question.
it is.
Yeah.
I'm asking.
And I'm an historian. So ask my friend
But you're
the
also a human
philosopher
being.
here.
Was it worth it?
Was it worth it, in your
Yes.
estimation?
I think it was. In the long run,
And maybe the short run if you were a slave.
yeah.
If
Once the die has been cast,
The alternative would have been very, very different to have let the South go, become a separate nation, I think. So it's a tough way to argue it. It is a
It is.
moral, philosophical question, but if you look at alternatives, I don't know if there were.
Unfortunately, we have to let go of Ed. He, unless you have something more to say here.
No.
But I know you have to leave.
Yes.
And we appreciate your being here, Ed.
Okay,
As
thank you.
always, thank you.
thank you. Glad to see you
Yeah,
again.
Good to see you, Ed.
Glad to meet you.